Whenever I listen back to something that I do, it just makes me feel weird.
Hi, my lovely.
Hi.
Welcome to America's Got Talent.
A 13-year-old girl walks onto a stage in front of 4 judges who have seen thousands of acts and heard every excuse for why someone deserves to be there. She says nothing dramatic. She just opens her mouth, and a sound comes out that does not belong to a child. Within seconds, Simon Cowell is leaning forward. Within a minute, the whole theatre is on its feet. Within a day, 10 million people have watched it happen. That girl was Courtney Hadwin, and the world assumed it had just witnessed the beginning of an easy, charmed rise to stardom. It hadn't. What came after that stage was quieter, harder, and far more human than anything the cameras showed that night, and it is the part of her story almost nobody talks about. Stay with me, because this is not the version of Courtney Hadwin's journey you've heard before. Courtney Hadwin was born on May 6, 2004, in the small village of Hesleden in County Durham, in the north of England. It is the kind of place where everybody knows everybody, where the biggest excitement of the week might be a school fair or a football match on the village green. Nobody in Hesleden expected a global star to grow up on their street, least of all Courtney's own parents. But from the time she could stand, music did something to her that it didn't do to other children. She wasn't just listening to it. She was absorbing it, physically, like it was rewiring something inside her. Her mother would put on records at home, old soul and rock records, the kind of music that belongs to a different generation, and toddler Courtney would move like she already understood the feeling behind it. By the time she was old enough for school, teachers noticed something unusual. It wasn't just that she could hold a tune. Plenty of children can do that. It was the texture of her voice, a rasp and a depth that seemed to come from somewhere far older than her years. Her school choir teacher pushed her toward solo lines. Her classmates gave her a nickname, half joke and half genuine respect, calling her Rocker Girl because of the way she'd throw herself into a performance like her life depended on it. She wasn't the loudest kid in the classroom, but put a microphone in her hand, and something shifted. What people often get wrong about Courtney is imagining that her talent simply appeared, fully formed, the night she stepped onto the America's Got Talent stage. In reality, that audition was the product of years of unglamorous, unnoticed work. She trained at Shotton Hall Theatre School, driven there most weekends by her mother, learning breath control and phrasing the way an athlete learns footwork, repetition after repetition until it becomes instinct. She sang at local festivals in Durham, at birthday parties, at small community events where the audience numbered in the dozens rather than the millions. Every one of those unremarkable evenings was quietly building the instrument that would later stun a room full of professional talent judges. Courtney Hadwin actually stepped into the public eye before America's Got Talent ever came calling. In 2018, she appeared on the British series The Voice Kids, where her audition caught the attention of coach Danny Jones, who became her mentor on the show. It was a smaller stage, a smaller audience, but it mattered. It gave her real experience with cameras, with pressure, with the strange sensation of being watched and judged by adults holding her future in their hands. Most people don't realize this chapter exists, because it gets swallowed up by what came next. But without those months on The Voice Kids, there might never have been an America's Got Talent audition at all. When Courtney and her family made the trip to the United States for her AGT audition, it wasn't a casual decision. It meant time away from school, a significant financial stretch for a working family, and a leap into the complete unknown. She had never performed for an American audience before, let alone 4 judges famous for their bluntness. Backstage, in the holding area, she was just one more nervous kid among dozens of nervous kids, gripping her audition papers, waiting for her name to be called. Nothing about that moment guaranteed what was about to happen. Then she walked out, the band started playing Piece of My Heart, and something took over. Her voice cracked with a rawness that felt almost uncomfortable to witness, the kind of rawness you don't expect from someone who hasn't lived enough years to have earned it. Simon Cowell's eyebrows shot up. Howie Mandel covered his mouth. By the time the final note rang out, the theatre had erupted, and Cowell hit his golden buzzer, sending golden confetti raining down over a girl who, moments earlier, had just been another face in the lineup. It is one of the most replayed audition moments in the show's history, and it deserved every bit of that attention. But here is where Courtney Hadwin's real story becomes far more interesting than the viral clip. Overnight fame does something strange to a person, and it does something particularly strange to a 13-year-old. She was suddenly fielding interview requests from major television networks, appearing on The Ellen DeGeneres Show, singing with a live band on The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon, all while trying to keep up with schoolwork through a tutor because she was constantly traveling. Her performances during the live rounds, including a searing rendition of Janis Joplin's Maybe, pulled the studio audience to its feet and racked up millions of views within a day. She advanced deep into the competition, eventually finishing as a finalist, an extraordinary achievement for someone who had barely started secondary school. And yet, for all that success, Courtney Hadwin did not win America's Got Talent. That's a detail that gets glossed over in most retellings, because it doesn't fit the fairy tale. She left the competition without the trophy, without the $1 million prize, carrying instead a viral moment, a loyal fanbase, and a very uncertain path forward. For a child who had just been told by millions of strangers that she was destined for greatness, walking away without the win was its own quiet, complicated kind of heartbreak, even if she never said so publicly in those words. What happened after the camera stopped rolling is where the harder chapter of her story really begins. Courtney signed with Simon Cowell's label, Psycho Music, and in 2019 she released a project called The Cover Sessions, a collection of live recordings that showcased her voice on classic soul and rock songs. It felt, for a moment, like the natural next step in a story that was still climbing. But the music industry rarely moves in straight lines, and for a teenage artist trying to figure out who she was outside of a talent show format, the path forward was far murkier than anyone on television had made it look. Then came a crisis nobody could have predicted. In 2020, Simon Cowell's label Psycho Music shut down entirely, and the global pandemic arrived at almost the same moment, freezing the entire live music industry in place. Tours were cancelled. Studio sessions stalled. Plans that had taken years to build were suddenly suspended indefinitely. For an established artist with years of infrastructure behind them, that kind of disruption is devastating. For a teenager who was still trying to find her footing after a whirlwind television run, it was something closer to being cut adrift. Courtney Hadwin, still a teenager, found herself without the label that had signed her, without touring income, and without a clear sense of what came next, all while the entire world sat locked indoors. This is the part of Courtney's story that never trended, because there was no viral clip attached to it, no confetti cannon, no golden buzzer moment. There was just a young woman, barely out of childhood, sitting with the reality that the industry that had celebrated her at 13 had no particular plan for her at 16. It would have been easy, understandable even, for her to quietly disappear the way so many talent show contestants do once the cameras move on to the next season's breakout star. Plenty of viral discoveries fade instead of grow. Nobody would have blamed her for stepping back entirely. Instead, Courtney did something that takes a specific kind of stubbornness. She kept working, mostly out of view. During the pandemic, she was introduced to the songwriter and producer Kevin Bowe, and the two of them began collaborating, first on a 2020 Christmas single, then on original material that had nothing to do with covers or talent show nostalgia. This wasn't glamorous work. It was the unseen labor of an artist trying to rebuild an identity from the ground up, writing songs in isolation, without a label, without a guaranteed audience, without any certainty that anyone would care once the music finally came out. That period stretched on for years, mostly in silence as far as the public was concerned. Fans who remembered the golden buzzer moment from 2018 had little idea what Courtney Hadwin was doing in 2021 or 2022. There were no big interviews, no talk show appearances, none of the machinery that had surrounded her as a young teenager. She has spoken since about feeling, during that stretch, like she was starting to lose track of who she actually was as an artist, caught somewhere between the persona built for her on reality television and whoever she was becoming as she grew older. Figuring that out took real time, and it happened almost entirely outside of the spotlight that had once made her famous. Then, in February 2023, 5 years after her audition first stunned America, Courtney Hadwin released Breakable, her first original single as a fully independent artist. It marked a genuine turning point. No label was steering the decisions. No show format was shaping how she presented herself. This was Courtney, entirely on her own terms, putting out music that reflected wherever she had landed after those difficult, uncertain years. She followed it with That Girl Don't Live Here in April, and Call Me Back, a soulful ballad, that summer. Later that year came Monsters, a single that climbed to number 19 on Billboard's Hard Rock Digital Song Sales chart, proof that she could build genuine commercial success without a major label's backing. In 2024, the recognition continued to grow in ways that had nothing to do with reality television nostalgia. She performed at the New York Pop's 41st birthday gala in honor of the legendary music executive Clive Davis, a booking that speaks to real credibility within the music industry rather than viral internet fame. She recorded a live session at the renowned Metropolis Studios, capturing her band's sound in a way that showcased just how far her artistry had developed since that first raw, unpolished audition years earlier. Singles like Spellbound and You Only Love Me When I Lie followed, each one pulling her further from the shadow of being remembered only as that girl from AGT and closer to being recognized simply as a working, evolving musician. All of this led toward her debut album, Little Miss Jagged, the culmination of a rebuild that took the better part of a decade. Think about that timeline for a moment. The audition that made her famous happened in 2018. Her actual debut album didn't arrive until years later, after a label collapse, a pandemic, a long stretch of anonymous songwriting, and a complete reinvention as an independent artist. That is not the story of overnight success. That is the story of someone who was handed a moment of extraordinary attention as a child and then had to spend years quietly, painfully, figuring out how to turn that moment into an actual career, with no guarantee it would work. It would be easy to tell Courtney Hadwin's story as a simple, uplifting fairy tale. Shy girl from a small English village becomes a viral sensation overnight. That version makes for a tidy headline, but it isn't honest, and it isn't nearly as compelling as what actually happened. The real story includes a competition she didn't win. It includes a label that vanished out from under her before she was even old enough to vote. It includes a pandemic that stole years of momentum from an artist who had barely had time to build any. It includes long, uncertain stretches where nobody outside her closest circle knew whether she would ever release music again, let alone build a real career. What makes Courtney Hadwin's journey genuinely remarkable isn't the audition. Millions of people have seen viral talent show clips before, and most of those performers are forgotten within a year or two. What makes a story worth telling is what happened in the years nobody was watching, the years without confetti or golden buzzers or standing ovations, when she had every reason to walk away quietly and instead chose to keep writing, keep recording, keep rebuilding, one independent single at a time, until she had something that was entirely, unmistakably her own. There's something worth sitting with in that. We tend to celebrate the moment someone becomes famous and assume that's the hard part, the mountain they had to climb. But for Courtney Hadwin, and for so many performers who experience a sudden burst of attention at a young age, the harder climb often comes afterward, in the silence once the world's attention has moved on to the next viral clip. Staying in the industry, finding your own voice again after someone else built a version of you for television, doing it all while growing from a teenager into an adult in full public view, that is its own kind of resilience, even if it never trends the way a golden buzzer moment does. Today, Courtney Hadwin continues to write and perform as an independent artist, building her career on her own terms rather than the terms a talent show format once handed her. She has said, in her own words, that this new chapter is about doing things my way, a phrase that carries a lot more weight once you understand everything she had to go through to be able to say it. The girl who once stunned a theater into silence at 13 is still singing. She just had to fight, quietly and mostly out of view, to make sure the world would still be listening when she was ready to sing on her own terms. If there's a lesson buried in Courtney Hadwin's journey, it's that the loudest, most viral moment of someone's life is rarely the whole story, and it's almost never the hardest part. The real test comes afterward, in the ordinary, unfilmed years where talent alone isn't enough, where you have to decide over and over whether to keep going when nobody is watching and no outcome is guaranteed. Courtney Hadwin made that choice. And whatever comes next for her, that choice alone is worth remembering her for. Thank you for watching Courtney Hadwin's real story, the one that goes beyond a single viral clip. If this gave you a deeper appreciation for what she's been through, stay tuned, because there are more stories like this one still to come.